And if you're out there pioneering, doing something that's entirely new that no one has ever done, and you feel very alone trying to do this new thing, kind of keep in mind that if you actually are pioneering, that there's probably a lot of people that might want to help you pioneer that. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people behind you who'd be like, okay, well, if you're trying to do this, I think that's really cool. So let me help you do it. There's this kind of perspective, I think, sometimes that we're alone. I know this, I fall victim to this. I kind of get in this trap a lot where I think it's all got to be up to me all the time and no one cares enough to help. And it's just not true. It's just so not true.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte, identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles so that you can claim your own path and make your life a work of art.
In the wise words of Uncle Iroh from the classic animated series Avatar: The Last Airbender, when you look for the light, you will often find it. If you look for the dark, it is all you will ever see. Normally, I don't prep these things too much, but, we were having our pre-conversation, Brandon, about what we were going to talk about today, and that struck in there into my mind. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to save it. I'm going to open up the podcast with that one because I think it has a lot to do with what I think we're launching into today, and perspectives for leading a creative life. And I guess to expand on that a little bit, examining maybe what are healthy perspectives, what are healthier perspectives for us to take around with us in our lives that can potentially facilitate greater creativity, and by extension, greater creativity, greater joyfulness, well-being, lots of good stuff. I kind of associate a creative life with a joyful life. So I'm excited to get into this conversation. Brandon, what do you got to say to start things off?
I like the way you started it, Evan. I thought it was a nice touch. Well done. I would say that something that I kind of would like to get into that's kind of relevant for me is how we're kind of blind to our perspective to some degree, that we assume that maybe the way we see the world or the way we see things is actually accurate or true or real or the right way or maybe the only way. I know that for myself, that's something that I've caught myself in a little bit. And I find it interesting because it takes a lot of honesty and sometimes humility to challenge these things. I do think, and I could be wrong, but I do think most people generally would accept that thinking positively, being more optimistic, looking for the light is a good thing. And being too pessimistic and looking too dark is generally not the best way to go. But I think we have roundabout ways of tricking ourselves into doing the opposite of what we know or think to be best. For example, I think sometimes people go, well, that's not realistic, as an example. And it's like, well, that's to assume that your perspective is realistic, which it might not be.
Yeah.
But this is my point, is that people assume that they know what's realistic. And it's like, well, actually, you might not. And that might mean resetting a lot of how you actually look at the world.
Yeah.
I
Sorry
have more to say on that, but yeah.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, like, there's something that I've been saying to people for years, which is there, just because it was an observation I made a while back, which is there's a lot of pessimists out there masquerading as realists.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I find that there's a lot of people who identify as being realists. I'm just being a realist, and it's just like I don't know. I don't know if you are being a realist.
It's a justification for playing it safe a lot of the time.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but it was.
Oh, you didn't.
It was funny, but
it's all good. I mean, the I'm working this out for myself because I've recently caught myself in a bit of a, in a bit of a perceptual rut, if you want to call it that.
Me too. And I think that that's, this is a timely conversation because, I mean, shit, here we are. It's like we're almost 2 years into this fucking insanity of the globe over the last while. And it's, I think everyone is exhausted. Everyone's tired. Everyone's fatigued. People are just barely hanging on in different areas of their life. And I'm definitely, there's a lot of very currently relevant. There we go. Thank you, Brandon. Thanks for the save on that one. But yeah, there's a lot of that there for me as well right now. And before we move on, I also wanted to say something else. It reminded me in what you were saying of something that Dan Millman said, which is, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are.
Yes.
And so I think that we've got some good stuff here that we've sort of colored this conversation with already at this point, and we can dive into the meat and potatoes of this whole thing. So I don't know. Do we want to share some personal stuff, kind of like what led into this conversation, or no? I mean, I can share my thing, I suppose.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, sure. Let's do it. Share away.
Yeah. And so something I just became aware of in the last couple of days is that, my focus, has been too much on the negative side of humanity in the last while. And it's really easy for that to happen. I mean, we're inundated with stuff, whether it's on the news or in social media. Like, we're just being hit with very extreme perspectives a lot of the time. And that's a whole issue in and of itself for people much smarter than us to get into, Brandon. But we know it's happening. It's not a secret. But, we're exposed to so much of this. It can become so easy to just see nothing but the negative, to see nothing but the dark. Not that it's not there. There are people who are, very sad right now, very angry right now, very hateful even, and people who are, struggling with depression. I think that probably a good chunk of most people over these last couple of years have probably experienced some level of depression, comes and goes, that sort of thing. And realizing that, my mind was focusing a lot on that. Like, oh my God, people are just having, like there's so much sadness, there's so much anger, there's so much of all of it. And it can be so overwhelming, and it's such an incredible weight to carry. And it's important that we're not blind to these things, because when we have a relationship and an experience with those emotions and those things, it allows us to be more human and more compassionate. But I realized, this sense of like, well, look for the beauty in people, look for the passion in people, look for the creativity and the, there's all of that going on in too, like look at that spark that exists within every single human being, like that's all there, and you're just not looking at it. And looking at that, I think that it's not a situation where it's like, well, you either do this or you do that. It's not about being blind to either one of these things, but it's like, where are we trying to ultimately direct ourselves towards? What is ultimately the place that we want to go to? Because, it's like one of those things, what you focus on is usually where you end up landing, right? Like it's, When you're driving a car, when you're learning to drive a car, they tell you, it's just like, look, when you're going around a corner, you're looking at where you want to go. Like that's how you do a nice smooth turn, is by looking at where you're trying to get to. They say the same thing with like, a lot of skiers, like alpine skiers and stuff. When you're going through a wooded area, you don't focus on the trees. You focus on the path between the trees, because if you start looking at the trees thinking, I've got to not hit the trees, you're probably going to hit a fucking tree. Yeah. So like great alpine skiers, they train themselves to focus on the path in between, on the open space. And that's how you navigate through there. And it's I think that there's a lot that we can take from that in how we look at our own lives and the things the places that we're trying to go to in our lives. Do we want to focus on the trees and sure enough smash into one? Or do we want to focus on the path in between? And that path is where there's movement. That path is where there's excitement. That path is where there's there's just, it's clearly what you would rather do. So yeah, I don't know. Take it away, Brandon. That's my spiel.
I love it. I used to do downhill mountain biking, and it's a lot like that. You're focused on the path, and you're focused on where you're going, and you're focused on, and you're surrounded by trees and cliff edges and rocks and all sorts of weird stuff. And you're moving through it pretty quick, through pretty rugged terrain a lot of the time. And, if you're really pushing, you're going at pretty high speeds. And, it's interesting. Actually, I'll share a story because maybe it's kind of relevant. But I remember this one morning I went to do my downhill mountain biking, and I was about 16, I think, 16, 17, maybe around that age. And it might have been 15. I don't know. It's hard to remember. Doesn't matter. Irrelevant point. Anyway, I'm just recapturing this. So it was pouring rain, and I used to love doing downhill mountain biking in the pouring rain. I loved the mud and the muck and this, and I had my gear, and I loved just getting gritty and getting into it. And I was getting pretty experienced at this point, so I was pretty good on my bike. And I'm coming down this pretty steep hill, which is like a bunch of S turns, but it's very steep, and I was going quite quickly. And as I came around the second to last big S turn, there's like, you kind of come out of the bush, and then there's a cliff edge, which drops probably about 20 feet down to the next part of the path, where it swings around 20 feet lower. So that's, you're dropping like, maybe 40 feet per, just to give you an idea of how quickly I'm going down a mountain, right? Anyway, I come around this S turn, and I squeeze my brakes, and nothing. I'm like, my brakes are gone. Holy shit. And I'm about to go towards a cliff edge. And I'm just like, I'm going to die, right? Like, that's the first thing you're thinking, because you're like, if I go off this edge, it's not going to be good, right? So, and I kid you not, it was like out of a with I just fell on my side. Like, as I was turning the corner, I just leaned down on my hip, and I slid sideways, with my bike on my side through the mud and the dirt towards this cliff. And I remember in that moment, like, everything just slowed down. And there was this part of me that was like looking like, I'm going to go over this edge. I'm going to go over this edge. And then in that moment, I was just like, I'm not going over this edge. And I just looked at the ground that I needed to grab, and the friction I needed to create. And sure enough, I slid right to the edge of it, and my bike was like pretty much hanging over, and I stopped just before it. And I was like, wow, that was close. And it was an interesting moment, because you can kind of decide in life, you might be beyond the point of being able to control what's going to happen. But when I lost control and I was out of control, it looked horrible. And I think you have to make that decision. Am I going to give in to the inertia of the bad thing, or am I going to resist the bad thing and put my attention or focus on something else? And I find it kind of an interesting thing. You pointed out how there's there's all these trees, there's all these obstacles, there's all these things that could go wrong all around you. But when you put your attention on doing something like downhill mountain biking, you literally focus only on the path. You don't focus on hitting a tree or a rock or going off a cliff. Like when those things start to happen, if you slide out of control or something happens, it's constantly about readjusting back to the opening. And I think that there's something to do with this conversation we're having where, realistically, you're more likely to hit a tree or go off a cliff because there's more of them around than there is path, realistically. But it's not realistic because if your focus is on the path, it's actually more realistic that you'll stay on the smaller part, which is actually less realistic statistically. There's less path than there is trees and obstacles and ways to go awry, right? So it kind of begs the question, is it realistic, or is it just that you're focused on what there is more of, or then and does that matter? Like, is more actually what reality is, or is the purpose and the point and the direction and the path that you're on, is that actually more reality, depending on how you look at it? So, if some people see an opening and they see themselves going through that opening, even though the percentage of making that opening is more rare or lower, it doesn't mean that it's any less realistic if that's where they put their attention, their focus, and that's where their perspective is, where it's kind of garnered, right? So yeah, I think kind of an interesting analogy you brought up, because it really does relate to how you're dealing with the obstacles of life.
Yeah, and it is interesting because there's it's a funny thing that you bring up, as you said, because if you continuing with the metaphor of downhill mountain biking, there's, as you're saying, there's more tree than there is path. There's more dense, unnavigatable stuff than there is path. But if your focus is on the path that exists in front of you, and when you're doing it, maybe you've ridden a trail before a few times, but you're still, you have to confront really just the next few seconds. That's all you've got to do is just navigate the next few seconds and you'll make it through.
Yes.
You make your way through, and those trees never become an issue.
Yes.
When your focus is on the path. But I think that, it's interesting that this whole thing has kind of come out this way. But in terms of this conversation, we're talking about perspectives, and I think that this has created a nice sort of path for us here to get into really what we're at the crux of this whole situation, this conversation, which is, how we are looking at things and how that can facilitate greater creativity in our lives. And if we're looking out at our world and it's nothing but failures and dangers and a hostile environment that we're looking at, we'll probably, for one, we'll find it, right? Or that's the way our minds work. We will find it somehow. We'll look for it on some level, and we will be proven right. The issue with that is that it doesn't serve creativity in any way whatsoever. Creativity does not thrive, let alone, I don't know if it even really functions when you're in such a negative state. It's very hard for creativity to thrive when that's your focus, which I think is one of the beautiful things about art, because art very often communicates negative things, it very disturbing things, upsetting things, but the art itself is a way of bringing light to something. It's a way of I don't know, sometimes removing some of the power of it. I mean, I don't know. It's up to every artist and that can, how they express that. But it's an interesting relationship how eventually that has to be transformed into something creative. Eventually that darkness, in many ways, it's what art is doing is it's holding that darkness up to the light, right? For it to be looked at, for it to be dispelled, for us to maybe somehow take some of the sting or the power out of some painful situation. But we need to put our focus on like perspectives that actually help us, as opposed to, working against us. I know I'm saying like I'm realizing I'm like, oh, I'm bringing up a lot of quotes in this one, but the Sadhguru, Hindu guru who's out there in the world today, a living guru, folks. I saw a talk that he gave at one point in time where he was maybe you could argue he's generalizing, but I thought it was fairly accurate. But he was talking about basically mental disorder in the terms of like depression and that sort of thing, and anxiety, like the sort of the multitude of all of that stuff. And he was saying like at the core of it is you are using your intelligence against yourself.
Mm.
You're using your intelligence against yourself, and instead of using your intelligence to work for you. And I think that's a component of what we're talking about here in terms of, like focusing on the path instead of the trees, focusing on the way through instead of the obstacles that may or may not present themselves.
Right. There's this whole idea of, if you don't know that something's possible, that something could go wrong, you don't think about it. It's not in your perspective. So in some ways, you can be a little bit too smart for your own good in a way, where you're aware of all the things that could go wrong. And because of that, you put your attention on what could go wrong, as opposed to all the ways things could go right, things could work out. And I think when I lack confidence, or when a person lacks confidence, they're tending to put their attention and their focus onto things as to like what could go wrong. It's very much about protection. It's very much about safety. And in a way, I think people stay small because it's safer, because when they think about being bigger, when they think about being bold and going out there and doing the thing and going for it, they think about what could go wrong, and that's just too much of a risk. And so then they just don't. And they fail to put their attention on what could go right. And they don't put enough attention on what could go right. And that's part of the issue. If we go back to the analogy again of this path that you're on, and that there's more unnavigatable terrain and more trees and more obstacles in the way, it's like, well, I could hit that tree. I could hit that tree. I could go off that cliff. I could stumble here. I could trip there, And if, yes, all of those things could happen, but you need to kind of continually redirect your mind to, I'm doing this, and this is what I'm trying to do, and something that I think is really important is not just getting your attention onto the point, onto the purpose, onto the way that you're going, but is recognizing that as much as it feels like we're all alone on our path, we aren't. I mean, in a lot of ways, people are out there and they're going to be ready to help you. If you opened yourself up to that, you would find out that people are there. And I think about the path that I was going down, even on that bike story that I told you about. Someone helped me do that because someone already carved out that path. So, if you think about it, there's things that people have already done for you in this life, and they've maybe even lived lifetimes ahead of you, and they've already carved out a path for you. So they already are helping you, showing you the way. And if you focused on the fact that, well, has anyone ever done this before? Okay, they did it. How did they do it? Let me model them. And maybe that's not going to take you all the way, but it'll take you some of the way. You know, at least it makes it a little bit easier. And if you're out there pioneering, doing something that's entirely new, that no one has ever done, and you feel very alone trying to do this new thing, kind of keep in mind that if you actually are pioneering, that there's probably a lot of people that might want to help you pioneer that. There's a lot of people behind you who'd be like, okay, well, if you're trying to do this, I think that's really cool. So let me help you do it. There's this kind of perspective, I think, sometimes that we're alone. I know this, I fall victim to this. I kind of get in this trap a lot where I think it's all got to be up to me all the time and no one cares enough to help. And it's just not true. It's just so not true, because every time I reach out and ask for help, or I just tell someone my struggle, I'm always amazed at how many people are like, well, I can help you here, or what about this, or some advice or some ideas. And maybe their advice or ideas are not always an option, but it's like, hey, you're trying, you know what I mean? And so something that I've been trying to encourage myself, particularly of late, is to share more, share what I'm up to, share what I'm going through. And I do think it's important not to share with people who are destructive. They have like a dark heart right now. And I say right now because sometimes I think people are in dark places and they don't know how to help or whatever. But I think you do need to kind of maybe choose who you share some stuff with. But I do think it's good to open yourself up to look for help and assistance and all that other stuff too with whatever you're doing.
Yeah. No, and I'm glad you brought that equation into it, because I think that's a huge part of this conversation in terms of, creativity thrives in a supportive environment. Creativity thrives in a supportive community. And so many of us love to, we've all, I think, been bamboozled into this idea of the person who's completely, independent and doesn't depend on anyone. But that person rarely exists. There are very few people who are actually like that. Most of us in today's day and age, and for most of time, we rely on one another heavily. But we're all acting like, we don't need anybody, or acting like we should act like we don't need anybody. It's a lot of layers to that thing, but it's nonsense. It's a lonely existence to do that. It's a lonely path to walk that isn't even necessarily that isn't even necessary. I think that we forget that most people want to help. Genuinely want to help. I think of, just think of someone in your community today, if they came up to you and a neighbor, a coworker, a somebody, and they just said like, hey, can you help me? Right? Most of us have an inclination of like, yeah, what is it? It's like most of us have that instinctual thing of just being like, yeah, how can I help? How can I be useful? I think that it speaks to this part of us, because being able to genuinely help somebody, to genuinely serve somebody, speaks to a part of us that I think that we don't often get that anymore. Like, so much of the work that we do in our world now has become so increasingly meaningless and banal. And when someone comes along and says, can you do something and can you help in a way that's meaningful, which is really what's going on, And it's just like, holy shit, yeah, I would relish the chance to actually feel like I'm of some use to somebody, because it gives us a sense of purpose. It gives us a sense of having some kind of an effect that goes beyond just us, you know, and the I that we're constantly dealing with, right? So I think that we overlook and undervalue that to such a large degree. I think that we've forgotten to such a large degree that this is within us. And that's, again, part of the way that we look at things. You know, it's just like, oh no, people expect you to handle your own shit, not bother anybody with your stuff and blah, blah. You know, some people are kind of like that, but those are usually pretty crusty fuckers. And, you know, I don't think that that's necessarily the majority of people, you know, but I think most people are happy for the chance to help. And so that's just another way in which this whole thing works, which is, are you looking at a world that is saying like, figure your own shit out and don't bother me? Or a world that's out there that says like, what are you doing and how can I help?
Yeah.
Is there some way that I can be a part of something? People love to be a part of something. You know, like especially creatively, when there's someone with a passion, holy shit. When somebody's got passion, like people with passion get people on board for stuff so often because we just want it. You know, we just want to be a part of something that's meaningful in some way. You know, like we yearn for it. We thirst for it as human beings. Hey, it's Evan with a quick public service announcement. If you're enjoying the conversation you're hearing and finding it helpful, then please help us and take a second to subscribe to the podcast. And we can all be people helping other people, and that's awesome. Now back to the show. Yeah.
You're spot on, man. Yeah, you're spot on. And it's funny because I think that sometimes we convince ourselves that everything's kind of tit for tat, you know, kind of like, what do I do for you before you do something for me? And I think that there's this kind of actually this idea that you need to already have proven your value to someone before they'll ever help you out, kind of thing. And it's just not true. I mean, a lot of helping someone out is what proves your value. And it's not even about improving your value to them. It's simply because you actually take a certain amount of pride at being good at something. Like if you can help someone with a skill you have, it actually feels good to do your skill. For example, Gabriel Napora, who is a very good friend of mine, and also he's been on the show. You know, he'll message me like regularly and he'll be like asking me questions. I'm really good researcher. It's something I've learned through my life that I'm really good at research. I'm really good at investigating things and learning. I have just this like great thirst for knowledge. And if someone asks me a question, even about something that I'm not interested in, but if I have some interest in what they're asking me, I'll go look it up and I'll go figure it out and I'll learn all the ins and outs about it. And, you know, he helps me so much. But one of the ways he knows I can always help him is he'll just be like, hey, the other day he was like, you know, I want to get a 3D printer. You know anything about them? I'm like, nope, but I will. And I did a whole bunch of research on 3D printing, and I tell you, I've learned a ton. It's a fascinating little area of study. And then I was able to explain to him a bunch of stuff and kind of point him in the right direction. And that felt really good for me. Plus it really helped him out. And, you know, it's interesting because, you know, you're banking, I'm not trying to, but it's funny because when you help someone out, you're banking all of this great, like, value with them because you become this kind of resource. And when you become a resource to people, they tend to want to help you. They tend to want to nurture that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, it's not always black and white. I think there are people out there who are users and abusers and people who take advantage and all of this, right? But you know, if you're thinking about giving and sharing your value, is don't focus on the users and abusers. Focus on the people that are grateful. Focus on the people that are appreciative. Focus on the people out there who could really get something out of something you have to offer. And as I say this to you and our audience, I'm reminded of myself. It's like, put your attention on the type of people you want to bring into your life. And when you come across the type of people you don't want to be bringing into your life, then move away from them, or, kindly step away,
Mm-hmm.
and find the types of people that you want in your life. And it's a lot about attention and focus and perspective, because I'm beginning to become more clear as this conversation goes on. It's all out there. It's just a matter of, are you able to identify and pick out what you want from what you don't want? And is your attention on things you don't want? And is that why you keep finding what you don't want in the world and being kind of oblivious or ignoring what you do want? Because actually, I'm reminded it is all there. The problem is that we have not honed our perspective and focus and attention in the right way to be able to pick out what we actually want. I think that's part of the issue here.
Yeah. And choice is so big in this, like how we choose. And sometimes that requires going up against some pretty well established patterns, got to watch those patterns. Inside joke there. Thanks, Bo. We appreciate you wherever you are. But sometimes we're coming up against, and we have to be very active in how we are doing this. But behind it is a reminder of just like, well, but what is the world that you want to live in? What is the type of world that you want to live in? And then choosing, right, okay, I normally see things this way. And, some people, they work with stuff like affirmations, things like that. It's just like, okay, when you catch yourself having this thought, when you catch yourself, falling into this perception, acknowledge it and then correct it with something else. Like mindfully say to yourself a different narrative, a different story that you want to lead your life by. So it's a very active thing that sometimes you have to participate in. And sometimes that stuff is very often that stuff, especially when, we want to look at creative people and artists. There's this whole thing, this phenomenon. I can't remember who talked about it, who was famous for talking about this. Might have been Brene Brown. It might have been Elizabeth Gilbert. Not sure exactly, but the creative wound, right? The creative wound where, that usually happens in childhood, somewhere along the line where you're doing something, you're painting, you're singing, you're whatever, and it's something that you're just loving to do and you're not very good at it yet. But you really love it. And then someone, a mentor, a parent, a teacher, somebody comes along and they say some shit to you that just makes you feel fucking bad about yourself and you stop doing it. And this stuff kind of happens. Like you and I came from acting backgrounds, and I know, Brandon, you've personally experienced this, but a lot of time people say that they want to be an actor. They want to give a shot at being an actor, and the response is like, oh, well, like it's, like that's the first response that you get from, like a parent figure, which is like, oh, not very many people make it. And, like you've got to really make sure this and that. And there's just like, holy shit, I'm sorry I even fucking told you. Like it's, and just to anyone out there, when someone is expressing a passion, whether it's new or not, but like when someone's expressing to you a passion that you're hearing for the first time, or even just a curiosity, something that they've got that a person is really excited about pursuing, do not have that reaction of putting trees up in a person's path. Like do not be that person.
Yes.
Like there's, yes, but there's risks with any path that you take. That's the thing. There's as Jim Carrey said, you know, like you can do something that you hate and still fail. You know, that can still happen. So, you know, support people in pursuing those things. Be there for them when they run into obstacles. Help them creatively solve those things that happen. Because the thing is that, yeah, like, you know, there are sometimes certain obstacles and certain challenges that can present themselves, you know, depending on what path you take. But not necessarily. You know, like one person's experience pursuing something isn't necessarily going to be the next person's experience pursuing something. So a lot of times, I think a lot of the times when we focus on all of these, you know, ways that things can go wrong or whatever, well, it's just like, yeah, those could go wrong, but they won't necessarily go wrong. You know, and if they do, then you address it at the time, you figure it out at the time. But I think there's too many times, and this is something that, you know, I've done a lot of work on myself in my own life, is that sometimes you focus so much on all the things that can go wrong and how things just aren't, you don't think things are good enough. You don't think that you're quite good enough, that you just stop doing you just stop. You just don't even bother pursuing it because you're so overwhelmed. You know, you don't see the path through the trees anymore. You just see trees. You know, you just see all of this shit that you're going to run into. So this is just my soapbox for today, as far as like, don't be one of those assholes, you know, like help people continue to focus on the path, right? Be supportive and be supportive by helping people focus on the path that's in front of them.
That's great, man. That was a great soapbox. I loved it. And I think you put forward a really good message too for our audience, because undoubtedly there's probably people who are parents or will be parents, or, you know, are in somehow, maybe whether they know it or not, mentors or teachers or guides. You know, maybe they have younger siblings or older siblings that they're even helping, you know, who knows? But it's like, you know, way of the artist, right, is like, it's not just about your way, it's about encouraging that people find their way as artists, as creative beings in this world, of people with, you know, that are more than just doing the safe thing or the thing they think they have to, you know. There's a lot of us who have, you know, given into what we call maybe like obligation, responsibility, you know, certain things like that we do them because we think we have to, and we just don't think there's another way for us. And so we just kind of submit to it, and we say, okay, well, you know, this is maybe for other people, but not for me, and all of that, right? And part of Way of the Artist, I think part of, you know, what we're always trying to encourage is that, you know, you don't have to just submit to that. You know, you maybe have a way, you know, maybe there is a way. And look, there's only a way if you believe there's a way. Because if you don't see the path between the trees, nobody can help you. But you don't have to see the path. You just have to be willing to see the path. That's a lesson that I've learned in my life over and over and over again. When things seem impossible and I don't see a way and I don't know how I'm going to do it. And this is my thing about reaching out for help and having mentors and teachers and guides and stuff like that. Because when you get a good guide or a mentor or a teacher in your life, what they do is, when you can't see the way, they help you to see the way. And then I've seen writers, particularly writers, which and I've seen other artists, but writers in particular, because this is fresh in my mind, where writers are like, I can't write a script, I can't do dialogue. They have all these things they can't do. You know, I don't know how to do this or that. And then they'll learn some tricks. Sometimes I'll teach them, sometimes they'll learn from other places, but I've seen this happen where people, they figure out how to do something, and the amount that they get lit up, the excitement, that like they have a strategy, they have a way, they have a path to actually make this happen, and they understand it and it makes sense to them. That's so exciting for people because they obviously believed there was a way. They at least thought, okay, maybe there's a way. I don't know it, but maybe if this person or someone I talk to or something I look at will help me find the way, even though I don't see it. And then all of a sudden they find it. That moment is so exciting for me. When somebody goes, holy shit, there's a way through this. There's a way to actually make this happen. Holy shit, this stuff is actually could be possible for me. And, sometimes it's just that once that person finds a little bit of a path, they can actually find the rest of the path or most of the path themselves, because all they needed was a step in the right direction. And Jordan Peterson talks about this, and he has a very emotional speech, which I really find very moving. But he talks about how people just need the littlest amount of encouragement. Just the littlest amount of encouragement can change their whole lives. And so, when you're talking about this, Evan, and people who are being kind of asses out there, like, instead of putting another tree up in that person's path, why don't you give them that little bit of encouragement? You could be the person that they're up standing, collecting an award, thanking. That could be you, because you were the one that said, hey, you know what, maybe it is possible, or maybe you try this, or maybe you do that, or, maybe I introduce you to this person. And you could be that one that changed someone's life, So,
And what did it cost you?
What did it cost you? And think about how much value you got out of it for your life and for them, and the movement you might have created in the world because of that. It is a wonderful thing. And I actually, it reminds me too, and I'll say one last thing about this whole topic, is that sometimes I think we get too focused on ourselves. I think that's a big mistake. I think we need to actually, sometimes we need to put our attention on, okay, how could I don't know what I'm doing necessarily for myself right now, but how could I go out in the world and try and help someone do something? Because by doing that, it inadvertently can help you help yourself. Sometimes it's actually, more often than not, I would say I find it easier to help other people than I do myself. Mm-hmm. I'm sure a lot of people can relate. It's weird that way, but if you go out and you just ask people, like, what do you need? Is there any way that I could help you? Like, what are you trying to do? And just see if you could help them. And if you could, would you mind, I don't want anything out of it. I'm just literally, I'm trying to experience my value in the world, and I'm just trying to help people. And if there's anything I can do to help you, do you mind if I try and help you? What do you need? I just want to know, and I'll see if I could somehow do it. And honestly, no hidden costs. I don't need anything back. I just literally am trying to test myself in the world to see if I can actually help people. And I think by doing that, like, they'll, in it, no matter what, they're going to appreciate you. Like, you don't have to ask for anything. You're going to be appreciated. But whether they say it or not, you will be. But the thing is you'll begin to see your value. And I think that's a really important part in this process, is that you see that you are valuable. You do matter.
That was so much fantastic stuff, Brandon.
You spurred it on, man.
I wanted to, I just wanted to touch on something, because I was like, wow, I've never really thought about it in this way, but it's really struck me in terms of, our show is Way of the Artist, and, our whole sort of, our tagline is, claim your own path, right? Way of the Artist, what we're trying to do here really is, in many ways, it's like this is exploring the ways in which, how do we find, and discover and follow the life that wants to be lived through us. You know what I mean? And following it and trusting it against, anything else, like following that inner sort of light. But what you said that really struck me is that, that's all extremely important. But part of that as well, part of the Way of the Artist is about other people. That way of the artist is to help others do that same thing. to encourage other people to do that same thing, to walk the path that you're trying to walk. That's not the same as yours, but it's the same in the sense that you're both, that you share with these people the same desire, the same sort of sense of searching and seeking and will to continue along this kind of life that isn't always easy to take, and that encouraging and being supportive and helping others to do that is essential. It's essential to you walking your own path, is by creating the environment for others to walk it as well. So I was just really struck by that, and it really kind of hit me in what you were saying. So thank you for that, sir. Thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. It's been a good conversation. I mean, these things, they're always a little bit relevant to us. And I think what's always kind of fun about just discussing it and putting some attention on this stuff is we always come to some awarenesses ourselves by the end of these. And I find that extremely rewarding. And I think, for me, recently is, finding a connection with people and realizing that I'm not alone has been such an important part of my journey in this, what's that word, where it's like this part of the trail, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there was a period, and I'm sure many people can relate to this. You go through these periods in life where you feel like you're alone. You're the only one walking along your path, and there's just no one there, and it's just you trying to figure it out. And maybe you don't feel supported or encouraged, or maybe you don't really feel connected to everybody. And I'm sure that over the last couple of years of all this craziness, there's lots of people that feel that way. And so maybe it's a good time, maybe it's a good time to start putting yourself back out there, reaching out. Maybe it's time to pick up the phone and call someone and hear their voice. And, instead of just being on a text message or a messenger, maybe it's time to, take that step to connect and, just get out of your own shell, and at the end of the day, like, no matter what you think or what someone else thinks or what your opinion is or point of view is, we are all on this rock together. We're all in this together. We are the human team, and some of us might be trying to sink the ship, if you want to use that analogy. But regardless, we're all in it together. You know what I mean? And if there's more of us working together and more of us teaming up for good and more of us trying to help each other, we got a better chance together. You know what I mean? And we don't all need to be individuals, and it doesn't all need to be about feeling good either. I think that's a really important thing to remember, is that I think through hard times, we can feel down, we can feel depressed, we can feel angry, sad, whatever. And, that those feelings might not just go away. But I think what happens is people spend a lot of time just trying to feel better. And they do things that are very insular and very like self-involved, like they watch TV or they do their vice alone, whatever that might be. And I think it's a good time to look at how, instead of trying to just manage feelings, we start to look at like, okay, how do I rise above the feelings I'm having and actually go take action and do stuff and connect and just, expand, right? Because I think that's an important part of this too, is that we expand beyond just being in our own little bubble of, aloneness. I think that's an important part of this.
Yes, indeed, sir. Yes, indeed. Should we take a short beer break?
I was thinking so.
All right. Well, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I'll go first. Now, vaguely think that maybe you had this one before. I don't know. It might have been on the podcast, but anyway, it's called Peach Bod.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've had that one.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is my first time having it or not, but it's a sparkling peach ale. And it's pretty tasty. It's got a nice peach flavor to it. Oh, Parallel 49 Brewing Company, by the way. Not an ad, just something we do as a, you know, a thing, a tradition. But anyway, no, the beer, this is good. I always like peach beers. Peach is one of my favorite flavors. And this one's very smooth. The peach flavor is nice. It doesn't have like really any hop at all. It's very like it's very clean and crisp and peachy, just peachy. So I'm enjoying it. That's what I got for you.
I remember drinking that one. I drank it. I had that back in the summer, and it's I remember really enjoying it. So I'm drinking Dawn Patrol from Tofino Brewing Company. I haven't had anything from Tofino Brewing Company in a long time, but they're fantastic. And this is a coffee porter.
Ooh.
All natural, unfiltered, 6.5%. It's got some kick to it, and it's delicious. It's freaking delicious. It's got a lot of flavor. Like, it is rich. Like, when I took my first sip, I was like, oh my God. Like, it's definitely got, like, they put some coffee into this. It's got a lot going on in it, and in a good way. So cheers to them in good old Tofino, British Columbia. Beautiful place. Yeah, that's a winner. I'll drink that again.
Nice. All right. Well, let's wrap this baby up. Oh, well.
How do we wrap this one up?
We covered a lot of good things. I'm happy with the way this conversation goes. I think what's important for me on a personal level is that I walk away and I challenge myself a little bit on how I've been looking at the world. I think that we need to be honest with ourselves, and I think sometimes it's humbling to recognize that, hey, wait a minute, maybe the way that I'm looking at things, or maybe the way I think things work, isn't actually how it works and isn't actually what's going on. And I think that having that kind of critical thought is not only very healthy, but it actually opens up a lot more options for you as what you can do and what's possible. So I'm definitely going to kind of take that on moving forward. And I think that, as we go down the road here, I think the thing is like, without sounding cliche, I think it's really important to put my perspective on how things can work as opposed to how they won't work. And to maybe, in this case, expand the way in which I look at how they can work. Like, what I mean is that maybe there's like a series of possibilities that I see possible, but maybe there's a whole bunch of other possibilities, and I'm sure there are, that aren't even in my awareness right now. But to put faith and trust in the fact that if I reach out and ask for help and connect with people and, open up to them about what I'm doing, and, and just look for the kind of people that I want in my life, and just build and nurture that and focus on that these possibilities that maybe aren't even in my perspective today will be tomorrow or down the road. And this is about expansiveness, and people, I believe, help us expand ourselves, and they open us up to realities that are beyond the bubble in which we exist. So my call to action to everyone out there is like, burst your bubble, burst your bubble a little bit. Maybe what's in your bubble, maybe this reality you're living in, maybe it's not the best, and maybe it's time to, break through it and, create something else and open up. And maybe that'll be a little scary, but I think it'll be good for you. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I recommend for everyone else.
Excellent. Excellent. It's very, yeah, excellent. Yeah, this has been a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. It's been particularly relevant to me. The word was there for me this time, Brandon. But yeah, this has just shown me again how important it is to be so mindful about what you're putting your attention on, because what you put your attention on creates a connection with that thing, and that connection gives life to that thing. So what are you giving life to through your attention? And give life to the path between the trees. That's what you want to give the most amount of life to. And there's so many ways in which we may need to re-examine some of these things that we're putting our attention to, and call into question, why do we maintain and hold on to these perspectives that do nothing but generate fear and anger and hostility? Like, is that because that's what your life is going to become? That is what you're going to give life to in your life. And I don't think anybody in their right mind would choose to do that. Yet it is something that in many ways we are choosing to do. So take that leap, to choose differently, because it can be so easy and tempting to choose to see things in such a negative light, but it's not helping you lead a life creatively. See a world of opportunity and see the people around you as being allies, as being there for you in some kind of way. Create a world that will support you, that will that will support you, that will nurture you and nourish you. And when you start to see things that way and make that a part of your vision, I think you're going to find the more the world shows up to support that. Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.